Hello everyone, welcome back to our TOEFL iBT speaking series. In this video we will be talking about tasks 4 and 6, the two integrated tasks that deal with academic courses.
So if you have followed our course to this point, you know that the tasks are extremely structured, and it's very easy actually to remember what you need to do for task 4 and task 6. What is difficult about these two tasks is really understanding the lectures. The reading is really not that difficult. If you have practiced well enough for the reading part, you'll have no problems with the reading here in task 4. However, the difficulties will be in the lecture, listening to the lecture, and this is the part of the TOEFL speaking that really tests your ability to be able to understand a university level lecture. If you can comprehend this part successfully, you should have really no big problems in understanding lectures here in higher education in the United States. Okay, so the structure for task 4 starts with a general academic passage for 45 seconds. What does that mean? So it is normally taken out of a general textbook. It is not an academic article. It's not a paper, an essay. It is normally a textbook chapter that gives general information on a specific subject. And there are all kinds of subjects. It could be psychology or biology, physics, chemistry, math, or social studies, all kinds of subjects, but they are all general and easy enough to process. If there are words that are specific for the field, you will get a definition. So you will get a general academic passage for 45 seconds, and I'll show you this later. After this, you will get a related lecture, so a lecture that assumes you have read the text, and this happens very often in university. A professor will assign something to read, and you have to listen to a lecture related to it. After that, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your answer. There will be a prompt for you to read, and then you will answer for 60 seconds. Okay, so a few tips for task 4. First of all, it's important that you have to remain objective. So when it comes to other tasks, you can sometimes be a little bit subjective. You can express your own opinion. Here, it's very important that you stick to what you hear, stick to what you learn about from the passage and the lecture. So you have to remain objective. Use the third person pronouns whenever possible. And remember, tasks 4 and particularly task 6, these two tasks are meant to be difficult. The strategies that I'm introducing now and will introduce in following weeks will definitely help you. And of course, practicing helps. But know this is the most challenging part of the TOEFL speaking. And if you struggle at first, it's perfectly understandable. Okay, so know that this is difficult. It's important that you don't stress about understanding every word. Just like in the listening section, it's really important not to panic at this point. Really to think about understanding the main ideas of the lecture and have some details, but not really every single word, because the prompt will not require you to know every detail. Okay, so some more tips. What you will normally try to look for is definition and classification. So during the passage, or especially during the lecture, you should take notes and pay special attention to when certain key words are defined and classified, different types, different kinds. So, for example, if you hear is defined as, so for instance, deliberate practice is defined as practice, that is, etc., etc., take note of that. Write down that key word. What I like to do is use a colon and for definitions, and that will save you time. Or refers to, this is another way of showing definition. Or you can say there are 3 kinds or 3 types of attachment styles, for instance. And when you hear types or kinds, you know that each type, each kind will be explained a little bit more in the following. So look for that kind of structure that tells you what is going to follow, and it will help you as you go along listening to the lecture and answering the prompt. So this is the biggest tip that I can give for task 4. It also applies to task 6. Okay, so an answer structure will look like this. It can vary quite a bit, but be careful that you don't repeat all of the details. The structure should be a short summary, and then details that are 40 to 55 seconds. So make sure that you answer the prompt, answer the question. Sometimes the question is like, how many types of a certain thing? Or what are some details? What are some examples? Make sure, above everything else, that you answer the question after you have a short summary. So for task 4, break it down into these two structures. Short summary with emphasis on the lecture, not the reading, and then focus on answering the question. Okay, well, the next part to task 6 is a long lecture, 2 to 3 minutes. So after you finish task 5, this is the most difficult part. So if you've done well so far, here I think you can relax a little bit. Don't be too nervous, although it's the most difficult. Task 6 is a long lecture. Relax, but pay close attention. After the long lecture, you get 20 seconds to prepare, and you will answer for 40 seconds. This is different from task 4 in just one way, which is the lecture is longer and there's no reading passage. So for the task 6, you have to be aware, sorry, this is a typo, task 6, be aware that it's most difficult because of the long lecture. And make sure that you remember that note-taking is key. Make sure that you practice note-taking, and we'll talk about this in a future video, but make sure that you practice note-taking beforehand. And pay attention to the prompt before you answer. When you are about to answer, circle the parts that matter the most. This is important for task 4, but especially important here in task 6. Circle the parts that the prompt will want you to answer, and answer those directly. Some other tips: pay attention to the key words, the beginning of chapters, the beginning of paragraphs, and write down 2 to 3 key words. Lay out the major sections and structure them. Lay out the major details and add them into your notes. Very often, the prompt will be quite detailed. It will focus on a specific part. You have to really understand and have some details. So make sure that you don't summarize too much. Focus on your specific answers because time is short, and this requires quite a bit of practice. So let's get into practice for task 4. So we're going to do this a little bit differently. What I'm going to do is I'll show you everything. Normally you will read, but you will also have to listen. Here today, because of convenience, I will show you everything and I will read it for you in a bit of a slow way. And you can practice taking notes with this, and I'll also show you a model answer. This is taken from our Easy Test platform. So if you have interest in practicing more questions, you can always go onto our library website and practice the questions there. This is taken from the Easy Test platform to illustrate what you will need to deal with. But I'll explain what the difficult things are, what you need to pay attention to, and how the answer is structured in a way that is helpful. Okay, so this is the passage that you will need to read. So I'll just read it out loud, and we'll do it together. So bride price and dowry. Many traditional societies, the event of a marriage includes a transfer of money and or property from one family to the other. When the transfer of money comes from the bride's family, it is called a dowry. A dowry is meant to assist in establishing the new marital household, or can be used by the woman in cases of widowhood or when her husband is negligent in the marriage. The practice of dowries goes back to ancient Greek times, but as societies became more developed, many of them dropped the practice, often reverting to bride price. Bride price is a fee paid by the groom's parents to the bride's parents in exchange for their daughter, who typically goes to live with the groom's family after marriage. The practice of bride price goes back at least 5,000 years, predating the practice of giving a dowry. Okay, so once you've finished reading this, there are a few things that you should note. First, it is about bride price and dowry and its definitions. For those of you who speak Mandarin Chinese, of course, 聘金, what is it, 嫁妆, right? These two things. And you notice these two are compared, right, in terms of the different practices. If it's the bride's family giving it to the groom's family, the husband's family, it's called dowry. Vice versa, bride price. And bride price, according to this final detail, predates the practice of giving a dowry, so it's older. So there are some details that should form in your mind immediately as you are reading. Now let's take a look at the lecture. So the narrator will say, now listen to part of a lecture on this topic given in an anthropology class. Okay, 人类学, anthropology. So the practice of transferring sums of money, property, or goods at the point of marriage is common in many modern societies. In India, the practice of, I think it's dahe, is still pervasive. Dahe is the transfer of money from the woman's family to the man's family upon marriage. Besides cash, dahe may also include gifts like jewelry, electrical appliances, furniture, or other household items. The costs associated with dahe can be huge, sometimes more than 6 times the family's annual income. As a result, dahe can be an enormous financial strain for the bride's family. They may go into debt as a result, and it causes families to not want to have female children. Due to these issues, the practice of dahe was outlawed in 1961, but it is still practiced illegally by both Muslim and Hindu families across India. Okay, so of course the key word here is dahe, right? D-A-H-E-J. Even if you're listening to this, when you can't spell it correctly, still you should recognize what it means and the context in which it is practiced. And also relate it immediately to what we had in the reading. So it's a special kind of dowry practiced in India by Muslim and Hindu families that causes enormous financial strain. So make sure you get that detail correct. Let's look at an example from another Asian country. In Thailand, it is the man's family. So an example of not dowry, but of bride price, right? That is expected to pay a fee called a sinsot to the woman's family at the time of marriage. It is often argued the purpose of the sinsot is for the man to demonstrate that his family has sufficient wealth to take care of his new wife. The value of a bride price may be very small or even nothing. For example, if the woman was previously divorced or has a child fathered by another man. At the other end of the spectrum, the sinsot may be tens of millions of Thai baht if the woman is extremely beautiful, educated, or comes from a high social background. Sinsot is given during the wedding ceremony, and it usually includes 3 things: cash, gold, and in modern times, a diamond ring. Okay, so notice the differences. As you are listening, what you should do as you're taking notes is immediately make some comparisons. The lectures are structured in a way that you can make comparisons as in where it is practiced, how it is practiced, what is important to know, some details that are important to know. So make sure you have those comparisons, and we'll return to this in future lectures. So the professor discussed 2 types of marriage payments, dahe in India and sinsot in Thailand. So this is the narrator. On the basis of his descriptions, describe whether each one is an example of bride price or dowry. So you have to be able to connect these 2 things. So notice how the professor's lecture does not mention bride price or dowry specifically in the words. You need to make that connection yourself. And so this is a model answer. Based on the professor's lecture, it is clear that dahe in India is a form of dowry. Very important way to start. The professor states that the money is given from the bride's family to the groom's family at the time of marriage, which fits the definition, be careful of this, definition of a dowry given in the reading. The professor goes on to explain that a dowry can include many things besides cash, and that it can be a huge burden on women's families in India. Because of this, it has been illegal in India since 1961, but many people still do it. Okay. The second type of marriage payment mentioned by the professor is called sinsot and is done in Thailand. This is definitely an example of bride price as described in the reading. Because the man's family must pay the money to the woman's, the professor mentions that this fee can be very small or very big, depending on the woman's background. It usually includes three things: money, gold, and a diamond ring. So it repeats details, but most importantly, if you forget the details, at the very least, you need to make the connection between the reading and the lecture. Okay, so let's move on to task 6. Okay, so listen to part of a talk about the psychology of colors by a professor in a psychology class. So here we go. According to the English scientist Sir Isaac Newton, a scientist that I'm sure you've all heard of, when pure light passes through a prism, it separates into colors. Each of those colors actually consists of a single wavelength. You can't combine one of those wavelengths, but of course you can combine different ones to get different colors. Now, the reason we are talking about colors in a psychology class is that psychologists believe different colors can have different psychological effects on human beings. Actually, the way we perceive colors varies according to person. For example, the way that I see red might not be exactly the way that you see red, but they are probably close. Okay, so at this point you should note Newton, prism, wavelengths, right, and the differences in humans in perceiving colors. Okay, let's move on. You know, different colors have different ideas about the meaning behind colors, but psychologists have determined that certain groups of colors seem to have universal meanings. That is to say, there are similar beliefs about their effects on humans in various cultures around the world. Let's look at the effects that certain colors can have on the mind. It is generally believed that the color red, so note there are different types now, okay, so write down red, and colors in the same spectrum, such as yellow and orange, have a warming effect on the human mind. They can make us feel awake and comfortable. In certain individuals, they can have a stronger warming effect, causing emotions such as anger. Colors in the blue spectrum, which includes green and purple, are usually seen to have the opposite effect, one of cooling. They tend to calm the mind, inducing feelings of relaxation. In their more extreme form, they can also lead to feelings of sadness. Based on these effects, many ancient cultures used colors as a form of healing called chromotherapy. Some modern psychologists are skeptical about chromotherapy, while others insist that it really works. For example, one study showed that patients who took pills that had warm colors had better recovery rates than patients who took pills with cool colors. Using points and examples from the talk, explain the psychological effects of colors. So you have to be specific here. You have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to answer the question. So before we go into the model answer, I'd just like to remind you of the different possible psychological effects. So remember, there are two big types here, right? Red and the colors associated closer with red, orange, and yellow. It has a warming effect. By contrast, you have the blue colors, purple and green, which have cooling effect. And it manifests in chromotherapy, right? Okay, so let's take a look. The professor starts the talk by mentioning the scientist called Newton, who first discovered how light can be broken into different colors. Next, she explains that colors can have different psychological effects on humans, even though different people see colors differently. She says that across many different cultures, colors seem to have the same meaning. Then she talks about two different kinds of colors, warm ones and cold ones. Warm ones are like red, orange, and yellow. These colors make people feel comfortable, but they can also cause anger. cool colors are like blue, green, and purple. These colors can make people feel relaxed, but also sad. Because of these effects, people in ancient times used colors for healing, which is called chromotherapy. Some modern psychologists don't believe in this, but some studies also prove that colors can affect healing. That is a very complete answer. Okay, so for some suggestions, remember, listen to lectures often, particularly if you feel that tasks 4 and 6 are what you really want to work on. Listen to lectures online often and take notes. Practice taking good notes. Remember that as you are taking notes, it's important to stay organized and also to use symbols and abbreviations instead of writing out long sentences. In the future parts, we will talk more about some templates and note-taking strategies.
Thank you all very much for watching this video. In the next video, part 7, we will be talking about some useful tips for taking notes during the exam.